I missed my final exam because I made the reckless decision to attend a wild party instead. When my parents found out, they were furious. They refused to fund another year of college for me, leaving me in a desperate situation where I had to consider extreme measures to find a solution. The night of the party started off in a surreal way. As soon as I entered, the first thing I noticed was someone dancing on a pole. The host, who was a close friend of mine, greeted me with a bottle of some purple liquid and poured me a drink. I took a few sips, and he pulled out a bag of mushrooms, asking if I wanted to head to the shed to trip together. Naturally, I said yes, not realizing how badly things were about to spiral out of control. I consumed far more than I should have, and soon found myself having a full-blown anxiety attack in the shed. I collapsed, and someone rushed to perform chest compressions on me. In that intense moment, something bizarre happened. I suddenly felt like I had control over everything. I told myself I didn't have to be panicked, and just like that, I became completely calm. I got to my feet, feeling as if nothing really mattered. My mind drifted back to the dancer I had seen earlier, and I decided I would challenge her to a pole dance-off. But as I reached the back door, I tripped over a broken plank and slammed face first into the wall, knocking myself out. I woke up the next morning still lying on the ground, groggy and disoriented. That's when the horrifying realization hit me. Today was the day of my final exam. It was already 9:30 a.m., and the exam had started at 9. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, knocking over a lamp in the process, which shattered on the floor, but I didn't even care. I had much bigger problems to deal with. I quickly tried to gather myself, zipping up my jeans, but noticed I was only wearing one shoe. I frantically searched the garden and finally found the other shoe wedged under a broken plank of wood. I threw it on and rushed outside, still in a daze. But as soon as I got outside, my stomach sank even further. I realized my car keys were locked inside my car. I had no idea how that had happened, but there I was, hungover and without any way to get to my exam. I started running, desperate to somehow make it on time. The nearest bus stop was a few blocks away, so I sprinted toward it, hoping against hope that I could catch the next bus. But when I got there, the bus was delayed due to an accident on the route, and there was no telling when it would arrive. I was running out of options fast. I tried to order a rideshare, but just as I found a driver nearby, my phone battery dropped to 1%. I hurried to press submit, but then the app started asking for my credit card information, leaving me stranded and completely out of luck. I frantically reached for my wallet, my hands shaking as I fumbled to retrieve my credit card. The urgency of the moment was palpable. My phone was on the verge of dying, and I needed to complete the transaction. I quickly started entering the numbers, but just as I was about to finish, the screen went black. My phone had died. Now I stood there, breathless and panicked, with no car, no phone, and no time left to get to my exam. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I knew I had no other choice. I had to run to campus. It was 2 miles away, and I was far from being in any shape for a long run, but I had to try. As I sprinted down the street, I narrowly avoided a collision with a cyclist who wasn't paying attention. I managed to dodge him, but my luck ran out moments later when I tripped over some uneven pavement near a construction site. I fell hard, face first into the dirt. Pain shot through my twisted ankle, and my clothes were now smeared with mud. But I couldn't afford to dwell on my misfortune. I forced myself up, now limping, and pushed forward, my focus solely on reaching the exam center. When I finally arrived, I was a complete wreck. Sweat dripped down my face, dirt clung to my clothes, and my ankle throbbed with pain. But I had made it, or so I thought. As I rushed toward the door, a security guard blocked my path. He informed me that I was late, his eyes scanning me from head to toe with a look of disapproval. Desperation took over as I pleaded with him to let me in. I tried to explain everything: the mud, the oversleeping, the accident. I rambled on, hoping he would understand my situation, but his expression remained unchanged. It was clear I wasn't getting in. He told me I had missed the cutoff and that there was nothing he could do. No amount of begging or explaining was going to change his mind. Eventually, he told me to leave. Defeated, I turned and walked away. The journey home was a blur. I was too stunned to process what had just happened. All I could think about was how badly I had messed up. My heart pounded with anxiety as I thought about how my parents would react when they found out I had failed my last final. How could I possibly explain that I had missed the most important exam of my life because I had chosen to go to Jared's party? My dad had always warned me about Jared, telling me he was a bad influence and that I needed to focus on my studies. And now, here I was, living out every fear they'd ever had about me. I could already picture the disappointment in their eyes and hear the anger in my dad's voice as he told me how I'd thrown away my future for one stupid night. I should have stayed home and studied like I was supposed to, but no, I had to be the life of the party, proving I could hang with Jared and his friends. Each step home felt like a march to my own execution. The anxiety clawed at my insides, my stomach churned, and my chest tightened. I couldn't afford to fail this class I needed to pass to graduate this year. A week later, I went outside to check my dorm mail, and there it was, a letter from my college. My hands trembled as I opened it, and the words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had failed the year. I hadn't done well enough on my other exams to make up for the one I missed, and now I had to retake all my classes. Just like that, everything I'd worked for was gone. Desperate for some support, I called my parents, but that was a mistake. They were furious. My dad accused me of being irresponsible, saying I'd wasted my time partying instead of studying, while my mom kept asking how I could be so stupid. They refused to help me financially, insisting I needed to learn from my mistakes. I didn't even have the energy to argue. I just hung up, feeling utterly defeated. With no other options, I started working 2 full-time jobs over the summer to save up for the next year. One job was at a fast food place, flipping burgers and dealing with rude customers all day. The other was at a warehouse, stacking boxes and loading trucks until my body ached. Those months blurred together, early mornings, late nights, and barely any sleep. I just dragged myself from one job to the next, trying to keep my head above water. About halfway through the summer, I started noticing something strange at the warehouse. There was this guy, a coworker I hadn't really noticed before, who always seemed to be watching me. Not in a creepy way, but like he knew something I didn't. One day he came up to me while I was on break, sitting on a stack of crates trying to stay awake. He introduced himself as Ben and asked how I was holding up. I shrugged, gave some half-hearted response, and went back to staring at my coffee. But Ben didn't leave. Instead, he started talking about how he'd been in a similar situation when he was younger. He told me about how he'd screwed up, partied too hard, missed out on being an electrical engineer, and ended up working at the warehouse to make ends meet. At first, I didn't really care. Everyone's got a sob story, I thought. But then he said something that caught my attention. Sometimes life gives you a second chance, even when you don't deserve it. The trick is recognizing it when it comes. I didn't know what to make of that, but for some reason his words stuck with me. Maybe it was because I was desperate for any kind of hope, or maybe it was just because I was so tired, but I found myself thinking about what he said long after our conversation ended. A few days later, Ben came up to me again. This time, he had a proposition. He told me he knew someone who might be able to help me out, a friend of his who worked in admissions at a different college. He said this friend could pull some strings, maybe get me into a program where I could start fresh. At first I thought it was a joke, but Ben was serious. He said he'd seen me working my butt off and thought I deserved a second chance. He gave me his friend's contact information and told me to think about it. I didn't know what to do. On the one hand, it seemed too good to be true. On the other hand, what did I have to lose? I was stuck in a dead-end situation, barely scraping by, with no real prospects for the future. Maybe this was the second chance Ben had been talking about. So after a lot of back and forth, I decided to take the leap. I reached out to Ben's friend, and after a few conversations, it became clear that he really could help me. He pulled some strings, made a few calls, and before I knew it, I was accepted into a new program at a different college. It wasn't a prestigious school, but it was a fresh start, and the tuition was significantly cheaper than at my original college. My parents weren't exactly thrilled when I told them about it. They were skeptical, especially my dad, who thought it was just another one of my get-rich-quick schemes that was destined to fail. But I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a chance at getting my life back together. Starting over wasn't easy. I still had to work to pay for tuition, but the new program was more flexible, allowing me to take evening classes so I could keep my jobs. It was exhausting, but in a different way. This time I felt like I was working towards something, rather than just surviving. And it turned out Ben's friend wasn't just some guy who worked in admissions. A few months into the program, I started to see the bigger picture. I found out that Ben's friend wasn't just anyone, he was actually the dean of the college. That revelation hit me hard. It made me realize that Ben wasn't just helping me out of the goodness of his heart, he saw potential in me, even when I couldn't see it in myself. As the months went by, things started to turn around. My grades improved, I got more comfortable balancing work and school, and slowly I began to feel more confident in the path I'd chosen. One day, while I was at work at the fast food place, Jared walked in. I hadn't seen him since the night of the party. He looked different, like life had hit him hard too. We talked for a while, catching up, and he told me how things hadn't gone well for him either. After the party, he'd spiraled a bit, dropped out of college, and was now working at his dad's auto shop. He apologized for what had happened that night, saying he felt guilty for pushing me to stay and not making sure I got home safely. It wasn't his fault, not really, but it was clear he was carrying some of the guilt with him. He even offered to help me out financially, saying his dad's business was doing well and he could afford to lend me some money. I was tempted, but I turned him down. I didn't want to go down that road again, relying on someone else to bail me out. Besides, I was doing okay on my own for the first time in my life, and I didn't want to mess that up. We left on good terms, but seeing Jared like that made me realize how easily things could have gone the other way. If I hadn't met Ben, if I hadn't taken that chance, I could have ended up in the same situation, or worse. The rest of the year flew by, and eventually I made it through the program. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of times when I wanted to give up, but I didn't. I couldn't. Graduation day was bittersweet. My parents were there, but our relationship was still strained. Sure, they were proud of me, but the distance between us hadn't gone away. I think part of them was still waiting for me to screw up again. I couldn't blame them. I'd given them plenty of reasons not to trust me in the past, but even with all that, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I'd made it. I'd taken the second chance I'd been given and made the most of it. And in the process, I learned more about myself than I ever could have imagined.